The Hangout is on air, so we're officially live.
Awesome.
All right, so there's no one here just yet. But as soon as we get another person, so we will just chit-chat up a little bit. And so, John, as I was mentioning to Josh beforehand, the goal is to find out a little bit what's happening in your neck of the woods and then get your take on everything all the way around. And then also get some thoughts on what you believe 2018 may be like on all fronts. So let me see here. So we have 2 people, 3, 4, okay. So welcome to RTD Live Talk. Thanks for joining us. Today I'm excited to have my first 3-way conversation with my brothers from up north in Canada. I have John Sneisen from the Economic Truth, and I have John Sigurdson from the World Alternative Media News joining us. And so these guys are very popular in the alternative media world space. And so I'm looking forward to getting their thoughts on the economy and what their predictions might be for 2018 in this crazy monetary / financial world we're living in. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining me on RTD Live Talk.
My pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. I look forward to talking with everyone.
Definitely. So let me, I'll start off with some questions. So Jesse Jen says, well, I'm great to have you on RTD. Thank you. And as always, gentlemen, and whoever may be watching, the goal is to have you guys call in to ask a call directly, because the show is about giving you guys a voice to share your thoughts and concerns. So at any point, feel free to call in and we can chit chat from there. But gentlemen, just to get the conversation started, I'm curious as to what's happening in Canada, because I watched some of your videos, Josh, and you mentioned a lot about the housing market being in a bubble, the Canadian dollar, and all the same issues we're having here. So fill me in on what's going on in your neck of the woods.
Well, to start it off, and I'll pass it over to John in a second because he actually wrote a book on the Canadian economy. But just to start it off, I mean, recently there's been a lot of hype about, well, the Canadian dollar is going up. Everything's so great. You know, look, everything's changing for the better. You guys were wrong all along. But as a matter of fact, the Canadian dollar has actually continued to devalue. It's just that the US dollar went down further, and in comparison, it made the Canadian dollar look like it was going up. But we all know what happens with fiat currencies. All fiat currencies eventually revert to their intrinsic value of 0. They always have, they always will, going back to 1024 AD in China. And it's going to continue that way as long as we continue to depend on a fiat centrally planned legal tender system and not actually look towards being self-sustainable, financially responsible, and decentralized, diversified between cryptocurrencies, gold and silver, tangible assets, etc. But yes, there's huge market bubbles. There's a failing fiat system, as per always. And John actually wrote the book, the Canadian economy, or is Canada's economy best in the world, or something? John, you can go into that.
In the world, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. It's Canada, the greatest economy in the world. Question mark. That's what it is. Well, what I kind of went into is looking at all kind of aspects in the economy, from real estate to investments to, of course, the government, the big, beautiful government that we have up here in Canada. Looked at all kinds of aspects, and what I found was kind of a lot of scary things that I wanted to, give out to people. So that's why I wrote a book about it. And I found huge problems with the housing market, and of course the central bank has been involved in pushing down interest rates. So with that, when money is cheap, everybody is going on a debt binge, and that's what we've seen in Canada. In the United States, you guys had a big crash in the real estate economy. Meanwhile, Canada got bailed out through the TARP fund, which nobody has been talking about here in Canada. They're saying that there was no bailout. Well, there was, so the major banks, and we just continued to rise up while the United States, deflated their real estate market. But now, of course, the United States is on the way back up again from, the Fed keeping the interest rates so low. But of course, here in Canada, we had a massive bubble out of epic proportions, with especially Toronto and Vancouver being so substantially overvalued, which is just getting to a ridiculous level where people are buying close to shacks for millions of dollars. So it's getting kind of scary on that side. And then, of course, our government doesn't really care at all. It's kind of the same everywhere in the world. We have the same Keynesian mindset of we could just borrow and print money into existence as much as we can, until the fun is over. When there's a game over, people say, like, well, you're not going to pay back your debt. We're going to stop using your dollar, and then it's game over in the system. But until then, they're just going to keep on, printing more and more money. And I had a great article that Josh actually just sent me an hour ago, where it talks about how our current government is looking at running a deficit until 2046. So that's
possible. How can they time that to the T of 2046?
Oh, it's just ridiculous. And then of course I expose in my book about the so-called deposit insurance that we have here in Canada. I actually ran the numbers, and I found that in Canada, the deposits under 100,000 is insured by 0.39% of money that is laying there to bail whatever bank out that fails. So there's really nothing there in the Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation's fund. And I'm pretty sure if you run the numbers in all kinds of deposit insurance around the world, you find, similar numbers. Well, we saw kind of in Cyprus, where you had 6.3% taken off of people's bank accounts where they thought their money was safe.
And just to cut in for a second there, I find it interesting you mentioned the overvaluing of the markets in the housing markets in places like Vancouver, for example. And what I find really incredible is the fact that, there's a lot of people living in Vancouver who they're chasing the buck so much that they're looking at new apartments that are 6 feet tall. And I'm talking 6 foot tall ceilings on these places. They're trying to crowd people into these little areas, kind of like that whole Agenda 2030 kind of plan. Let's shove everyone into the middle of the city, into these tiny little homes. And, you can't even stand up all the way. You're bumping your head on the lights and so on. And it's just to the point where people are getting into a market thinking they're going to prosper so much, they're going to make so much money off of this system that's constantly growing in value to the tune of millions, where someone out of college goes to get a condo and they're paying $4.5 million for one little condo. And of course, people in Detroit can actually kind of recognize this as, I don't know, maybe a little bit of deja vu, because this is something that's happened time and time again throughout history. These derivatives markets, these manipulated markets where it's just propped up to the point of bubbling and exploding at an epic scale. And it always gets bigger every time they try to suppress it down and manipulate it into prosperity a bit longer. And it always grows in size and scope and becomes more dangerous. And when you look at places like Vancouver and Toronto, Canada as well, and places like Seattle, Washington, and places like Sydney, Australia, or you can look basically
Oslo, Norway.
Oslo, Norway, exactly. It's to the point where it's just so insane that this continues to perpetuate. So, let's go move to a place like Vancouver, because they got pretty mountains and, get paid a little bit over the average wage somewhere than most places, but then end up paying $4.5 million for a tiny little condo where you're bumping your head on the ceiling. And then at the same time, there's people watching home and garden television or something, and they see people fixing up houses and they say, hey, I can do that. I don't need to know anything about the market. I'm just going to go in there and buy at the peak and just expect to be handed thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars right on my lap, because, that's how it works. Just going to keep going up. This is the kind of destructive thinking that is going to lead to an epic destruction of people's pocketbooks. This is going to lead to something that we've watched thousands of times before throughout history, as central planners step in, fool the masses into getting themselves into debt. And that's where it comes down to the point that I try to make as often as I possibly can, is that the elite bankers and government thrive off of debt. As long as people are in debt, the government is happy. They can shove you down that bottomless pit of debt, and you are forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, which puts you in perfect servitude. Populace in debt is a populace in servitude, just like a populace in fear is a populace in servitude. So I think it's about time that people understand these markets and realize that, hey, the banks say that I can, get in on these great deals, these great loans. I could go and buy a house for, $5 million, and maybe I'll make $10 million off of it. It's just mentally inept. It's insane.
Yeah, or you could just do a reverse mortgage, Josh, where you take out a mortgage on your house that you pay down your mortgage on. That's also a great thing that I saw Home Equity Group of all yesterday was promoting heavily on Canadian television. So it just tells you how much this bubble has just been pushed forward. And of course, who is to blame? When you look around, it's the central banks all around the world doing exactly the same thing, because they're blowing these bubbles in the stock market, in the real estate markets, because that's where they know that people will feel rich, feel better off, that they, pumped up. It's like a massive pump and dump. We're talking about, cryptocurrencies, pump and dumps. Well, this is a pump and dump in the real economy that we're watching, created by central banks.
Real economy or fake economy, it's subjective because, of course, it's so far away from free market. It's all absolute manipulation.
It's artificial all the way. But think about it. This system, I mean, this current model of people really knowing that their house is way overvalued, they're not going to pull out short of trying to continue to make as much money as they can. So they're going to continue to do the same thing over and over again. And so more people are aware of the fact that the housing market's inflated, stock market's inflated. Everyone knows all artificial. But what do? If you pull out too soon, you're going to miss out on some gains. If you do pull out to be more, stable and secure with yours, what are you going to do as far as housing? What are you going to do as far as investments? Ideally, the whole, status quo is crumbling, but people aren't ready for that change until something happens, as always. So that's unfortunate, but that's how it goes, I believe.
Yeah, that's why preparation is so important. And I always try to explain to people, it's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. So they should always be looking into ways to protect their wealth, because, younger people under the age of 35, even 40, 45 in some cases, probably won't see a pension because, there's a massive shortfall. We're all heading into this future that's really, it's concerning, but there's a lot of upsides to it as long as people educate themselves. And that's why we do what we do here at WHAM. And I know that's why you do what you do at Rethinking the Dollar. It's trying to educate people so they have a handle on what they can, the decisions they can make in their life, the solutions, because there's a lot of problems and the solutions are the most important part of it. And that's, looking towards, ensuring your wealth, looking towards diversifying your portfolio in a sense where you don't have to depend on the banks or the governments or your company's, bankster Ponzi scheme pension plan. It's so important that people look towards ensuring their wealth and, taking care of themselves. But we've come to a point in history where most people have no handle on their wealth at all. Most people do not understand how to take care of themselves. Most people are dependent and just expecting that, the government's going to do right by them. The banking system is going to do right by them, and they're going to prepare for them. When in the end, we're looking at the biggest Ponzi schemes we've ever seen in history, and we're ramming into a brick wall here, and people don't even know it. So I really think that it's important to get the word out on, gold, silver, cryptos, not all cryptos, but certain cryptos. And then, of course, just looking into assets that aren't manipulated by the banking system and, shoving people into debt servitude like I go into so often.
All right, so let me propose a question to you guys. We have Dan K, who asked a question basically saying how many ounces of gold and silver till that's a good amount, I'm assuming. So, we can't give a financial advice, but in your opinion, what's ideal weight worth having in your possession?
Well, if you look at how much gold and silver will go up over time, I'd say that there's no cap on how much you should have. I'd say that you should probably have a bit over an ounce, maybe at the very least, though a small amount, a couple grams is still going to do you better than no gold. But of course, that's my opinion. John, I know definitely has a good opinion on this as well.
Yeah, we'll just look at your total portfolio. How much is your total portfolio? And then look at what experts say is the minimum is 10% is a smart way to start. And then you can just move from there. And now I have studied so much of history, and I got this great book that I suggest everybody reads. It's from Ralph P. Foster, which has the history of fiat paper money. And what it tells us is that the people that had, gold and silver throughout turmoils like hyperinflations, especially in the newer age, they were way more well off on the other side. So I personally have a lot more of a percentage-wise of my wealth into the gold and silver assets than what is suggested by the experts, because I know and I'm certain about the history of the experts. So I believe I personally I don't know exact amount. I'm not going to tell the exact amount, but I would say anywhere from 30 to 50% of my portfolio I hold in wealth insurance, because I believe in it so strongly from reading this repeated history. In that book that I was mentioning, there's almost 200 different examples where it talks about how the central bank scheme fell apart after creating it. I just got to tell you a quick, interesting story how it originated in Europe, and that's where everything that we have in Western Europe comes from today. It was in Sweden. In Sweden, in the mid 1600s, it was a guy called Palmstruck. He created the first private currency, paper currency system, and he, of course, after a while, printed more and more of the denominated paper currencies out to the public, and it's lost its value quite rapidly. Well, so what happened was the government came in and said, you can't do this anymore. We're gonna chop your head off. That's what they did to him. And then, of course, I think it was 20 years later, the first central bank in the world got created of modern history, which was the Swedish Central Bank. And the government used the exact same policy that they chopped this guy's head off of. So it just tells you that we need to protect ourselves, and we need to understand, the history and how it works. And gold and silver, you have to have that wealth insurance. Now, it's not an investment, because that's where people, start to fail, running out and selling their physical metal for other things, because they didn't understand that it was a wealth insurance. It wasn't an investment. So I just store it back in a safe somewhere, a safe place, and I don't really think about the price until hard times come, and then I take it out and I got to use it.
And if I could just cut in for a second, there's a huge power shift happening as we see, for example, Canada sold off almost all of its gold. We confronted the finance minister, Bill Morneau, about that in May 2016 now. Man, it's been a while already. It's time flies. But the guy sold off almost all of Canada's gold, except for, I don't know, a couple pounds or something like that. I forget the exact amount. But it's insane, because then you're seeing China buy up. We're seeing Russia buy up. We're seeing Germany repatriate a ton of its gold from the Federal Reserve as well. And it just shows that there's a massive power shift going in the direction of bigger central planners. And I have a lot of concerns about it, but I wanted to mention, because I saw the Grand Poobah actually comment in the live chat here on YouTube that you have to carry food and ammo too. And that's also very important, because of course, when it comes down to it, it always comes down to food, water, shelter, self-defense. You're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block, gold, silver, and in my opinion, diversified with decentralized, cryptocurrencies. But you take one of those things away and you could have a big problem. You obviously need food to live. You need water to live. You need the shelter, so you could keep out of the cold or out of the heat, etc. And then, of course, you need self-defense, because there's going to be people that will look at what you have and they won't have it, and they're going to try and take it from you, whether that be government or individuals. And then, of course, gold and silver. Yeah, you can't eat gold and silver, but it certainly helps you to buy food and water in the case of a crash, so that you don't have to steal it. I think it's a pretty important point to make, that gold and silver cuts out the necessity when you're in survival mode to, steal it from someone or kill someone for it. I think it comes down to being able to fairly exchange goods for services. And while you can't eat it, it'll help you eat in a coming crash. So I think that's an important point to make mention of.
Good deal. Now, another question from Scott Dickert is that it says, do I need to wait till the credit market blows up before I look to purchase a home? Seems like the everything bubble will continue as long as the biggest one does. So as far as, it's not advice, but, if you were a new homeowner and you were aware of things, would you be out here trying to purchase a home now with zero down and all the bells and whistles they try to give you as an incentive to buy? Or would you just wait a little bit until everything collapses and get it a lot cheaper?
Wait till it collapses and get in a lot cheaper, in my opinion. I definitely don't want to be getting involved in that craziness. Like I said, you're from out of Detroit, and I think that people around you have witnessed this themselves, including maybe yourself. I'm not sure, but just getting in on, wow, I got this great deal. The bank told me that I'm going to make out like a thief. I'm going to end up with all this money. I'm going to be able to profit so much off of this. And then we've seen what happened. And countless people became basically enslaved to the banks. They lost everything. And we can't allow that to continue to perpetuate over time. The whole repeating of the problem, reaction, solution, repeat, Hegelian dialectic. So no matter where you are in the world, don't ever trust what a banker tells you. Make your own decisions, educate yourself. And yeah, I mean, getting in after everything comes crashing down is obviously a much better idea than getting in right before it crashes. So that's my thoughts anyway.
No, you said don't trust the banker. Bankers are your friend. What do you mean?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, they want to make me lots of money. They totally don't want to just make a whole bunch of cash themselves and then have me as, a little pawn once everything comes crashing down.
No, I think it's very simple. It's buy low, sell high. It's that's with anything that you buy in life. No matter what it is, I hardly buy anything, on regular price. I always go and find the deal on it instead of buying it at the massive marked up value that you get sold it to. It always makes sense, buy things low, especially investments. You got to definitely buy those low and then sell high. But problem is that the public hasn't been informed, and they're emotional about things. They can't keep their emotion in check, and that's how you have this massive real estate bubbles. People are just continuously piling in, believing that the real dream of owning a home. Meanwhile, what they're not seeing is, as in Norway, my family and friends in Norway now are talking about a lot of people in negative equity currently because they piled into this massive bubble, and now finally it's popping in Norway, where the real estate prices are going down and people are caught with more mortgage than their house is valued at. And that's what we saw in the United States, during the subprime collapse in 2008.
Yeah, I do agree. Now, I want to extend the invitation to anyone out there who wants to call in directly to ask a question. I always love hearing some people's voice. And so next question I want to move into is the whole idea here, for the younger generation. We all kind of fit in that same category. Our grandparents primarily were sold on the concept of chasing the American dream, where you have to go to school, you have to get educated at a higher level in order to get out to workforce to get a good job. What are your thoughts on the whole pursuit of the, I guess, American dream? I guess it'd be Canadian American dream as well. You guys are attached to North America. We all Americans. So is it the same there as far as are the younger generation still buying into that concept of you need to have a degree behind your name or some type of certifications in order to be successful in his life?
Well, it sure did work out for the American Empire or the Canadian Empire or the British Empire for this to be such a, an obvious, go-to thing. When you become an adult, you must go to college, you must go to university, you must get a degree, you must listen to what the teacher tells you. Don't question anything, just listen to what he says, copy it down, repeat after me, the whole Simon Says mentality, and then go into this workforce, if you can even get a job after you go through university, for years and end up in debt and end up relying on your parents, being dependent on your parents. I mean, as I call the university system public indoctrination camp, it's basically you go there and you learn everything wrong. Like everything you learn in university, you should almost just do the opposite of that. Personally, I think trade school is a good option. But universities, colleges, they've gone to the wolves, basically. It's come down to this is how you are subservient to the king. Listen and repeat. And I think that's what's happened over time. Look at the, economic system, the monetary education in universities today. It's all Keynesian. It's all the Paul Krugman-esque kind of economic systems that, it'll teach you to be dependent and teach you that central planning is the way to the future. I think it's really important that rather than follow that whole mantra of go to school and get a good job and etc., do what you as an individual want to do, but you have to work hard for it. Don't be dependent on others. Whatever you want to do, you can do, but don't depend on a school to get you there. Don't depend on your parents to get you there. Don't depend on someone who's rich off the taxpayer dime to get you there. You have to get up, stand up, go out and do what you want to do by your own means and be an individual and not fall into the collective crowd that so many have fallen into in their chase for the American dream, the Canadian dream, the British dream, or whatever you want to call it. It comes down to the individual, and Yeah, I really find that the public school systems, what they're teaching little kids these days is insane. You go from that into college or university, or you don't go to either and you just watch mainstream media. Either way, it works out the same. You learn just as little and you are brainwashed just as much. And then you end up, 70 years down the line saying, well, I got a degree and I made this small wage working for someone else, and I never had any financial stability in my life. I've never been able to depend on myself. I've always been dependent on my boss, my family, the taxpayer, etc. The bank. I think it comes down to just getting up and doing whatever you want yourself, which is what I've done. I'm happy doing that. Also, cryptocurrencies have obviously provided a path forward for people who want to do that as well. But yeah, it comes down to independence and not just depending on a university to get you there, because you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, it all comes down to the American dream or the Norwegian dream, whatever you want to call it. This dream of becoming a middle class. It was all built upon debt. We got to remember that the reason why we have a middle class is because of debt. It was. I studied and read in books that talked about, the Chinese Sung Dynasty, for example, where they created a middle class because they started to indebt the populace. So they raised up, were able to, get involved and so on. But now today, the problem is everybody's in debt. And on top of that, we're getting hit on the other side from bigger and bigger government that, we believe in the government taking more and more care of everybody. So we're seeing higher and higher taxes on the other side, and then we have higher and higher inflation. So what we're seeing is what I've seen in most of the big socialist countries like Spain, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Canada, and other Netherlands and other countries. What I've seen is if you go and look at the stats, it's called private debt to GDP, which shows how much the private sector is indebted. And funny enough, it's all these heavily socialist economies with high taxation that have, everywhere from 300 to 250% debt to GDP in the private sector. So it just shows you how we're getting squeezed, and this dream that people had that they could have a regular job was destroyed because of the fiat currency system that was implemented. It just continues to lose in value. Having the government getting constantly bigger, you're just seeing the taxation bill that we have to pay is getting higher, while the money that we earn is losing more and more value. So what do people do? Well, they go into debt, and they got to get into more and more debt in order to be able to afford what they did back in the day and what their parents did. So it's just like kind of a end of this whole wave of debt that has been created that we're seeing, and we're going to see this massive deflationary event happening. But of course, what I see is the central bankers are going to come in and try to just print as much money as they can, and this is going to fail miserably because people are going to say, I had enough of this devaluing currency that I'm being forced to being used upon their legal tender laws. I'm going to say enough is enough. I want to get out of this, and I want to start having a real life without this currency that are constantly losing its value that I saved for all my life. And you guys at the government and everywhere else, you're just making it lose all this value, and I'm stuck with nothing left after all this hard work in my life. So I think people are going to start looking through this, and as soon as that will happen, in the coming years that I see, we're going to see, like in Venezuela, I predicted the hyperinflation there from their dependency on oil. It just took about a year, and now you're seeing people are actually moving away completely from the Venezuelan bolivar, going into other currencies or into Bitcoin or gold as a means of exchanging between each other.
Yeah, I wanted to, one more thing on the whole schooling subject is that Venezuela had a really great education rate. Their educational system was the best, and we can see how that turned out. I dropped out of school in 9th grade, picked up a bunch of books, learned things for myself, and now I'm miles ahead of most of the people I went to school with. I know a couple people that got through university and actually got a job, and they ended up working as a teacher at a school, and they are some of the most, hate to say it, dumbest people I know. And those are the people that are educating children. So I just say, yeah, education's great in Venezuela, education's great in Cuba. That's the one thing they have is brainwashing, and they're really good at it. So I think that that's a great sign that you got to turn to channels like Rethinking the Dollar, Wham, so many other channels on YouTube that provide so much more education than any of these indoctrination camps do.
Right. So now, you know, John, I think you hinted a little bit as far as people being tapped out with too much debt. And so there's no other option. So government has to get involved, because if people can't borrow, and if there's not, and jobs aren't plentiful, where's the income going to come from? So let's get in a little bit to the whole UBI, Universal Basic Income, how it's been thrown up. It's been thrown around, you know, a lot in various countries, and they have different test samples in various countries. I'm not sure about Canada. Is there a experiment going on in Canada right now in a small community, or is that over in Europe? But yeah, give me your thoughts on UBI. Is that coming for sure because of people being tapped out?
I think there's a couple of communities in Ontario, I think it was, that are running universal basic income right now. The whole idea behind universal basic income is for the poor people, you know, to be able to not struggle so much anymore. While they're also looking at, you know, paying everybody this universal basic income, what they're not really thinking about is the burden that new creation of money is going to create on the system. Because as we know, when new money gets created into the system that didn't come from anywhere, or maybe it has to come from somewhere, well, what are you going to do? You're going to have to raise taxes on people. So you're seeing this whole thought that, oh, we could just start giving money away to people. I think it's all like a transition that the government maybe wants to have in order to, you know, implement a further dependency of the populace onto the state, because it's kind of a stepping stone almost towards the communist state, where people now, when they have the universal basic income, I've seen with welfare in Norway, people are living on welfare and don't even care about looking for jobs because it's so good, the welfare in Norway. And I see that as pretty close to a universal basic income, if you ask me, the Norwegian welfare system. So I don't know, like this whole thought that when you give people the chance to just go and do whatever they want, they're gonna suddenly just magically find something to do and find a job suddenly. I'm not so sure that you could just give a whole bunch of money to people and then suddenly, voila, they will suddenly just be so much more productive with their lives. I've seen the complete opposite in Norway, where so many are dependent.
Yeah, interestingly enough, one thing I've noticed is...
Sorry, what, Josh, hold that thought. We have a call, so let's answer this call and see what the question might be. Hello?
Hello. Good evening, Mike. Good evening, RTD fans. Good evening, guests. This is Bobby, Bank Chief, all as one. I was going to ask a question we were just previously speaking about. Do you think that some of this, like this debt, it comes from everybody wanting their own? Their kids have to have their own. Because I was talking with some people, like they're from Spain and there's some from some other parts, but like their old cultures. It's like the children didn't have to leave, or the children generally didn't leave until they got married. If they didn't get married, then they just took over the, you know, the family's land, the family's houses, so they wouldn't incur, you know, debts for places to stay, vehicles, and things like that, because that was already there. And then if their family was doing bad, if someone did leave and was doing bad, they just came back to that house and nothing was wrong. Now today, it seems like it's more something that's shunned. Oh, you failed over there and you're coming back. Oh, that's not good. Instead of, hey, yeah, come back. You always have a place to be, you know? I could take this answer off air, but just tell me how you feel about that. Thank you very much.
All right, so let me make sure. Did you guys get that question?
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. So let me make sure, because I heard the question. So the question is, in Europe, children stayed in the home longer and they took on a family business, so they didn't have the need for debt right away. Is that kind of the question?
Well, not only business, but they were also, you know, a place to stay, the house. They didn't have to go buy another house. They didn't have to go pay that money onto, say, an apartment to stay, because they were just there with the family, and that was okay. And it seems like now in this society, I guess worldwide, but definitely here in, you know, in the, I guess you could say the first world, quote unquote, that it's more of like, you know, get your own. We'll do your own because we're going to go do our own now. When more, it seems like it would be more. It's more beneficial, especially for, you know, the youth coming up now. If you just say, hey, you don't have to go anywhere. You can stick around here, or you always have a place, instead of just everybody uprooting all the time, leaving nothing in the ground solid. You know? I get where he's coming from. There is a lot of good to
families that stay together, kids that live with their parents as long as they're, independent as well and working hard and growing in their life. But, it's a really big thing in Europe for people to continue to live together, parents and kids, as the kids grow into adulthood. You don't necessarily have to go into that, into debt. For example, the kids that are stuck at home and don't have a choice but to live with their parents into adulthood, into their 30s, even longer in some cases. A lot of those people are there because they were forced into it by, the college debt, university debt. They're forced into it by, a whole host of reasons. But then there's those that choose to do so. And back in like the 60s, 70s, there was a lot larger of a rate of people living at home with their parents after they reached adulthood due to the fact that they wanted to take care of their parents, but they were working and they weren't in debt. So it's hard to say. Yeah, there's different levels of it, but I think that today we're mostly seeing a lot of people living at home with their parents because they have no choice but to be. And I think we did a recent report on it that we're going to be posting, I believe, tomorrow at World Alternative Media, talking about the rate of people. I think it's about 43% of kids under or over the age of 18 going up to age 25 just never leave home in those years. People age 25 just still living with their parents. A lot of that has to do, it's bordered around the debt system that we are being pushed into. So I would bet that the vast majority of people aren't choosing to live at home with their parents, but more that they are forced to do so. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of people who want to take care of their parents, especially people who are born to older parents that want to take care of them as they get older, and of course want to provide for them, because a lot of older people are in debt as well due to bad pensions, basically stuck in a dead-end job their whole life and not turning out the way they wanted it to. But I don't know if that answers a question, but I kind of get the topic that he's getting at. So that's my thoughts anyway.
Yeah. Well, what I see in here in Winnipeg, just as an example, the more I see a lot of successful families that actually live together is more the Filipino population and the Indian, the East Indians, as we call them here. Where the whole family is at the core, where everybody's taking care of everybody at any given time. Now, I think we've kind of lost. I think that's where what he's talking about. We kind of lost that, want to, take care of all of our family and work together as a family. And we're being forced apart because we're, going out and everybody's taught to, go out and get your own house, because what did that benefit? The big, massive banks that can start sucking out money from you. So it's all about like creating a system where everybody is dependent on and have to go and work their ass off in order to pay off this massive amount of debt. In order to, when you look at some of these families that I know, they live together, 2 or 3 different families in one household. They are almost debt free. They are really like way well off than a certain aspect of, especially the regular population in our town, Josh. You can see that they're, they have a better understanding because they've seen a lot of the issues around the world, and they just basically have more of a view that you should always take care of your family, and they always live with them. But then also when they get richer and have a lot more money, they also take care of their parents. A lot of times the parents moves back in with some family members in order to take care of them as well. So
there's a lot of that in Mexico. I found when I was in Mexico last February and March, I noticed that a lot of families had 3 generations living in the same house, and small house, but they were happy, they took care of each other. That's totally fine. Of course, there's 2 sides to every coin, right? And sometimes it's, well, families want to live together, take care of each other. That's a great thing. And then in other cases, it's like, well, this kid is now 30 and he doesn't have a job and he's on welfare and, living with his parents and waiting for his parents to go buy his groceries,
Well, there's definitely 2 sides of the coin there, Josh, and I totally agree on both sides that we were just talking about. It's both a cultural thing, and then there's also a forced, a thing that are created with the current state of the system that we're in.
Yeah. And I just wanted to cut in quickly about what we were talking about previously with basic income, because you mentioned projects around Canada. And as a matter of fact, one of the first pilot projects for guaranteed basic income was in Brandon, Manitoba, outside of the city that we're in, Winnipeg. In the 1970s, it was one of the biggest first pilot projects on that subject. And basically, it kind of comes down to, it's like, well, $20,000 is worth this today. Let's just give everybody $20,000, and now that $20,000 will be worth this much less, and it'll buy this much less because everyone's getting it. Give everyone basic income, and then the price of living goes up, of course, in the tune, because everyone raises their prices because everyone is getting stolen from at a higher rate through taxation, and then all these people are gaining this money, and then the companies have to compensate for the amount of the average wealth of the individual, which is of course coming from the taxpayers. It goes in a circle, and it's a vicious circle, and it never ends. So I think that the basic income is a huge problem that we're watching happen right now in places like Seattle, which, it's same with the minimum wage in Seattle. It's like, well, these businesses have to pay these guys more. Well, actually, no, they don't, because they have the freedom to move, and now they've moved out of Seattle into the rural areas. They've moved to other states. They've moved to other countries. Now people have less jobs, and, a few people are making $15 an hour, which is great, but way more people are unemployed, and the labor force participation rate is like way down.
Yeah, and the UN comes in now to the United States saying that they have extreme poverty. Well, the problem is the states that they're looking at is Seattle, and no, sorry, not Seattle. What is the state up there? Washington. And then, of course, you have California. They're looking at the states that are run by people that think like Keynesians and think that you should be dependent on the government. And, of course, a huge dependency on the government. Well, what does that create? It creates poverty. That's what it does, because the government always wants you to just have enough, so you always want, if the government wants to do something, they could just say, oh, well, I'm going to take that away from you. That's what they call austerity in Europe. And then people are just saying, no, take away my, the money that I'm getting from the government, please, I'll vote for you. So that is, it's like a whip that they use on you as you have become dependent on the government. And this whole move with the universal basic income, that's the problem. Like, you're seeing the two-sided taxation, where you have the inflation that will go up, and then also, where is the money going to come from? It's going to come from the private sector. And looking at governments, what I call government expenditure to GDP, the governments that toppled in Southern Europe, they had 50% size of the economy was the government. It becomes over that 50%. Well, the problem is, where is that money going to come from? And it always comes from the private sector, that it has to be taxed in order to pay the government. And when the government becomes bigger than the private sector, it's unsustainable, and it will collapse, as it did in many Eastern European, Southern European countries. And we're looking at that happening now, not Northern European countries and other countries around the world, because governments have become too big. And there's always this cycle, throughout histories, where the government grows with the fiat currency printing, and then until they hit the point where there's no more debt and no more money and no more printing to be made, and people lose faith in the value, the government size and the scope comes down and collapses with it, the government and the fiat currency.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's a slippery slope into communism, right? So where the leaders are living in palaces while the people drink out of gutters. Not so fair, is it? If you consider the fact that so many communists and socialists and people on the far left anyway push forward this notion of, well, it's unfair for that person to make all this money because their work, they got all these employees and they're working hard and everything. But it's totally fair for the government to come in and steal your money and give it to these people that are complaining about capitalism, as if it's like, well, capitalism bad, so I think that they should be stolen from to provide for me. But then capitalism goes away, and it's like, oh, well, who am I going to steal from? I guess I have to get off my butt and start, digging ditches and growing my own, which I have no idea how to do because I've been dependent on the capitalists I hate so much for so long. I think it's a rather ironic twist when it comes to big government, collectivist order, where it's like, well, the capitalists are so bad, but we depend on them in the long run. And then you just slip into this, well, it's fair to steal, but it's unfair to, you know, voluntarily exchange goods for services. It's just that kind of doublespeak insanity that tends to, you know, get bigger and bigger over time, because it's easy to propagandize people with quote unquote free things without them understanding what those free things are and where they come from.
Right. Now, before the governments began taxing people out the wazoo, there's about $3-4 trillion in pension money and retirement investments laying around that they're going to tap into first. But let me take this call, and then we'll get into that thought as well.
Grasshopper, call for.
Hello.
Hey there, it's Alan from Alabama.
Hello, Alan from Alabama. How you doing, buddy?
Good, brother, man. And happy belated Christmas and happy New Year to y'all.
Thank you.
And
Same to you.
appreciate the guest.
Thank you. Yeah. Cool. What's your question, Alan? How you doing, buddy?
Doing good, man. Well, I'm listening to the conversation of the universal basic income, and I am an advocate for it.
Mm-hmm.
And something I think that your guests are really not looking into, and that is the technological unemployment and where technology is taking it. And yeah, I'm looking on there. The atomically precise manufacturing is going to be coming into play. I just looked at the EHang 184, the electric drone that's going to be autonomous.
Delivering goods.
Yeah, we're just absolutely heading into a whole new age for humanity. And we live in an age of abundance. We have artificially created scarcity. And everything is just going to have to radically change. And there's got to be a stopgap measure as a safety net for people, because we do live in a world of abundance. And the whole goal is to bring people up and not keep them down.
So whose goal? Like whose goal is to bring people up? I mean, so the question is, whose goal is to bring people up? Because from what we've seen, the goal is to keep the people down as far as all their rights, their liberty, their money, you name it. The goal is to not give us this freedom that this technology you're referring to is capable of giving us.
Right. And it's a double-edged sword. And I tell you, this is a very tricky time for humanity. And this century is going to be one of the most important centuries for humanity, because so much is going to unfold in this century. It's going to lay the foundation for the next 1,000 years. But what I see, and this came out in the Washington Post probably about 6 months ago, it was a short video they got from the Pentagon. And it was essentially talking about urban warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were saying is, in a city of 1 million people, there's going to be 1% that's going to be disenfranchised and unhappy and want to create terrorist attacks against the system. And that's what the whole reason for this centralized control is about, is because in this future, you're going to have the ability to create mass havoc and destruction with minimal amount of resources to attack the system that you're disenfranchised from. And that's why there's going to be such a push for this centralized control, which is going to be a part of this universal basic income. So I feel like we're going to reach a point where these people that run this world are either going to have to bring us up, or they're going to have to do away with it, because we're going to pose such a threat to their system. Either that, or they're going to have to create such a force that they can't ever be touched. And, you know, we're talking about transhumanism coming into play. Some of the first genetically enhanced humans, embryos were implanted this year, and that trend is going to continue. And you're going to have genetically enhanced humans, you know, starting by 2020 is going to be probably going to be a standard practice.
Right.
So we're going to be, there's people here that are not so more bright and thinking. We're going to be nothing, because these genetically enhanced people that are going to be born, they're going to be smarter, stronger, faster, disease resistant. You know, and this isn't fantasy thinking. This is what is actually taking place right now.
Right.
And just like that optogenetics I mentioned,
mm-hmm.
you know, a brief overview of that is having the ability to implant and remove memories passively with light. And they do it with a benign virus that has a genetically altered jellyfish gene implanted into it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're infected with the virus, and then they can passively implant a specific memory or passively remove a specific memory. And that's going to be rolled out for Alzheimer's patients and patients from post-traumatic war syndrome.
Okay, so let me pause. So with the information you gave you, I'm gonna let these guys chime in on the technological advances that you're referring to and how it's going to better humanity. So the universal basic income could be something that is needed.
Okay, so I realize that there's a serious issue with technocracy. There's a serious issue with AI. There's a serious issue with a lot of the genetic controlling that he talks about, and it does sound crazy, and there is a lot of truth to it. I would say that AI is something that is risking our futures in the sense where it's centralized and controlled by government, etc. But I don't understand where government comes in to save us from the same thing that they're creating by giving people guaranteed basic income. It doesn't really click for me. I find personally, the only justification for coercion is in the defense of life, liberty, and property. And when it comes to something like a guaranteed basic income, that's a government coming in and stealing people's money and then handing it over to people. And where are they getting that money from? That money comes from someone. That money comes from someone that works hard and
can use that money too.
Yeah, you still lose that money. The price of living still goes up. The the value of products still go up, and your money still becomes less worthy. And as it happens, people are getting stolen from. They're going into debt further. They got the income taxes, the business taxes, property taxes, capital gains taxes. In Canada, they have a carbon tax. That's a tax on everything. Export, import. Green tax. You can pile them on 100 feet high. And the fact of the matter is, we're facing off against a huge technocratic, monolithic mega state that we have to avoid at all costs. But I really don't understand how, stealing people's money and then giving it to someone else is going to fix that problem. Because in the end, it's both morally inept and it's also logically inept, because there is when you look at the fundamentals of how that money is actually going to save people or lack thereof, how that money is going to lead to further debt servitude, how that money is going to lead to further enslavement by the government. I don't understand how one wrong by the government is saved by one right from the government, if you call it a right. So anyway, that's just my personal thoughts on that. But I personally don't understand how they correlate.
No, well, when you look at the automation industry and all this robotics and everything that gets implemented, is of course also a cost of the fiat currency system, where they are stuck in the system needing to pay more dividends to their investors, the big corporations. We're not talking about the regular businesses here. We're talking about the big, gigantic mega corporations that are multilateral. They have to pay, of course, more and more money to their investors through the dividends. So they have to cut because their inflation is going up. The cost of the currency that they use and get paid, from the few products that they now produce is rising. So it's just a big, massive system that are created. All this automation that are coming out is just created because they need to get rid of the expenses in the businesses, and which is just putting in automation. I'm all for good kinds of automation that makes our lives better, and just having somebody working at these servers, like stores like McDonald's, which produces crap in my point of view. You just having them doing work that they could be more productive doing elsewhere. People have been displaced over ages through technological advancements. You got to remember that it's not the first time that we're seeing, technological advancements displacing people that used to be doing one thing. Well, you just got to get around it and start looking for new things, because there's always going to be new things that we can do and new jobs and so on. It's not that everything is going to be taken over. That's what people are looking at, this dystopic future where you have this mega corporations run by the government that are going to create all these slaves by just displacing everybody out of the working force, and then everybody's going to be just serfs living off of this universal basic income. I see it as a place where people are going to start innovating more. They're going to get involved. We're going to move around, to the moon, to everywhere else around the solar system, if we let the true fair market loose instead of having this government control and this mega corporations controlling everything and slowing things down. Instead, we could have, a huge prosperous future where everybody are getting involved in new sides of completely new jobs that we had no clue that would exist, at this current day. I think we don't really need this universal basic income. It's just a lack of thinking of innovation and the future and what we could do with it. It's just a limit. We're limited within the current paradigm of the current system that have the government and the big mega corporations that are displacing people out of the working force.
Yeah, you know how we destroy the system that we're up against, the technocratic global system that so many of us are trying to pull ourselves away from, is that we have a true free market based on individual demand, the demand of your dollar when you buy something, rather than the government monopolizing regulatory complex that creates these massive corporations that they say we need to have these regulations in order to stop these big corporations, when those regulations create those big corporations monopolies in the first place. If you leave it down to the individual demand of free people, individuals deciding, I want to go with this company, I want to go with that company, and that company does something wrong and they move to the competition at a lower price, at a higher quality. I think it all comes down to individuals looking towards true free markets. So we have innovation, we have competition, therefore we have more production, therefore we have more jobs, therefore we have higher wages, therefore the products cost less. I think that that is what it comes down to in the end, and not looking for government to add on or pile onto the problem they created in the first place, because that just comes down to maybe us just saying, well, I give up, I'm going to let the government take over my entire life, I'm going to let the government continue to steal from people, and they cause all these problems, so let's let them do it more and see if that works this time. It's never going to work. It's problem, reaction, solution, repeat, the Hegelian dialectic.
Yeah, where we have a system where money actually has value, the medium of exchange that we're using retains its value. If you add that on top of what we were saying, I think our future is quite bright, to be honest with you.
All right. Now, one thing we can't deny in the whole technological advancements that's really making mainstream news is the whole blockchain and crypto space that is really revolutionizing our financial system and monetary system, you name it, to the point where it has central banks, regular banks, for all financial institutions excited right now, especially Wall Street with all this futures going on. So let's get into the crypto talk a little bit. Now, we know that the Federal Reserve note and all other fiats are, they've run their course. They've enslaved humanity. So the humanity is opting out by looking into the blockchain and crypto currencies. What are your thoughts on that? And let's look ahead a little bit to 2018.
Oh, I think it's going to get insane. I think that 2017 is a good example of how insane it's going to get in 2018, because we're seeing the beginning of mass adoption. It's hard to say that it's full-on mass adoption quite yet, but we're seeing the beginning of mass adoption, and the blockchain can be used for two things: for evil or for good, and that all depends on the centralization versus decentralization. If we stay decentralized, we will be able to reclaim the monetary system for ourselves as individuals, rather than legal tender fiat nonsense created by the banking system that enslaves us in debt. So the difference is, for example, a cashless society pushed by the bankers would be a centrally planned cashless society where you are basically, if your money's in the bank, it's not yours, it's the bank's. But if your money's always going through the banks via digital transactions, legal tender laws, centralization, it's never your money, you never hold it. You're basically enslaved to the banking system and the government. Whereas you look at something like Bitcoin or EOS or so many other cryptocurrencies out there, and it comes down to you as an individual having control with the demand of the free market, decentralized, off the grid, basically, when it comes to the control complex that's pushing fiat into the ground. Fiat is worthless because it has no cap. The quantitative easing, the fractional reserve lending, it just pushes fiat into nothingness. It's devalued to zero. Bitcoin is following a kind of the same route as gold and silver, whereas there's not a lot of gold or silver on this planet. So therefore it creates great scarcity. There's demand, there's application, there's future potential. As goes for Bitcoin, where there's only 21 million coins to ever be created. That's mathematical fundamentals, cannot change by the year 2140. So scarcity, demand, application, potential further use. Now, of course, it's a competing currency market, so there's a lot of altcoins that it's up against. And that brings me to the fact that Bitcoin can be overtaken by another altcoin eventually. That comes down to the demand of the individuals, whereas fiat, you are forced to have it, you're forced to use it despite the fact that you don't like it, because legal tender laws say you have to, that is your currency, and anything else, it's gonna be a capital gains tax, or you're gonna be taxed to death by the IRS or the CRA in Canada. etc. Bitcoin, altcoins, these are the future. And we see that in something like Steemit.com, which is on the decentralized blockchain, where it's a social media platform, much like Facebook, where you post your blogs, the same stuff you do on Facebook anyway, and people upvote you and give you money for your posts. It sounds like a Ponzi to anyone older than 25, but the fact is you really don't need to put money into it. I have been able to go on trips to places throughout the world to cover conferences because I'm posting my YouTube videos on Steemit as well, and people like it because it's a product that they enjoy, and therefore you as an individual are the product. They give you demand, they upvote you, and you gain money. You can trade that into Bitcoin, you could trade that into gold, you could trade that into an asset, or you could trade that into fiat if you really want. So I think that this is a future. It has its own governance on the free market outside of, you know, central planners, and I think that this is going to be the future as long as we stick to the decentralization and understand decentralization versus centralization, so that we're not pulled into another trap with the IMF special drawing rights global cashless system. That is a whole different ballpark than something like Bitcoin or Litecoin or Dash or EOS or one of the other cryptocurrencies. Many of them, many are terrible. Many are great and stand to be the future. So 2018, I can see, in my opinion, Bitcoin hitting huge numbers like we never thought were possible. And at the 7-year average daily rate of growth, Bitcoin should hit $250,000 by the year 2020. That is just basically the algorithm that is currently at, based on past growth going back to about 2010.
John, what are your thoughts?
No, I think this whole cryptocurrency, the invention of it, that's what excited me in 2013 when I started looking at it. And I got quite excited because it's decentralized. It's taking power away from the elitist controllable system that have the central banks, the big corporations, and the government controlling it, the fiat currency system that we currently are using on a global scale. I think what we're seeing is with what we've seen with computers, for example, and I think this is where the technology is going back to again, and what the real people are fighting back against. We used to have the computer terminals when computers were first invented. We had a central server somewhere that, you know, sent information to your terminal. Then we went to having stationary computers where our hard drives, everything was saved on our hard drive. Well, now again, we have more like clouds. You heard about everything cloud today, which is basically everything is just at a data center somewhere, all our information, and we're not storing it on our computer anymore. And that's where they want to go. They want to take us more and more in that direction so they could keep and control all our information that we have. Because what they've let loose with this internet that they first started was a monster. The elites are scared to death because now suddenly everybody has the opportunity to listen to guys like us, and we could come out with a message that are telling the truth about the history of the world and the current system that we have. And people are getting scared of that. And I think we're going to see this move, this common move of the centralization and more harder focus on that in 2018. We're going to see more and more like the Ethereums, the Ripples, all these currencies going to try to take over and look like the big shiny object that everybody's going to flock into, the centralization and the control of the bankers again. Meanwhile, you're going to see the other side is people that are going to create more and more, even more decentralized technologies than the current blockchain system. I see people that are promising technology like Hashgraph, for example, which you don't have to have the massive mining power that's behind Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies that are getting mined. They eliminate all that. So you just see this whole massive innovation towards the future where people more are getting back their power by decentralizing again against the current push for mass centralization again, back to the old computer terminals where they have all the control over the data sitting at one place, instead of you having it, everybody having it individually on all the billions of computers that we have now all around the world, and they could still communicate with each other. They wanted that central control so they could, you know, if it got too bad, if it got to a revolution, they could shut off the information. And that's what it really excites me, is that we're looking at this decentralization. The more and more people are piling into Bitcoin, it's become highly speculative right now. But what I see, a lot of those people are, going and trading, and then they suddenly start reading up on Bitcoin and what was the whole idea behind it. And then suddenly they're starting to get educated, bump into people like me and Josh and others like you that are talking about Bitcoin and gold and silver and all this, the whole like monetary history and money and everything. And what they're starting to see, the general public that got involved initially as an investment, now they're suddenly starting to see that, I've been a slave all my life, and then they start educating themselves. So I think this is very interesting, in the coming years as this whole adoption and more money are piling into these cryptocurrencies. People are going to get probably more and more educated on it. And I think if we were lucky, we're going to see a huge move suddenly when this whole collapse of the current paradigm, the current system is coming down. I think if we have the right pieces in place, if we work really hard in the coming years, I think we could create total freedom for ourselves instead of the current path that we have towards this enslavement that they're just constantly pushing upon us.
Yeah, and I feel at the same time that it's just in its infancy, right? It's a market that's volatile because it's just really in its infancy. It's just starting out, and a lot of people are worried right now about futures, for example, possible ETFs on Bitcoin, etc. And in the short term, I understand being concerned about such a thing. As adoption is so low, of course, it's going to have somewhat of an effect. But at the same time, you look at since 2012, especially, gold and silver have been heavily manipulated by the banks via paper ETF contracts that have just kind of held it down like a beach ball, gaining pressure underwater. But none of that matters in the long term because these banks are all going down. They are not going to last a very long time. They are going to be something of the past very soon, and Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are a great sign of that, as well as the future potential of the bull market for gold and silver. I think that these are great examples of insurance of wealth, and with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, great investments going into the future. So I personally feel like we're heading in a good direction, no matter how negative the world can be. Often, I think that we're looking at something that is going to continue to grow because such a tiny percent of people are actually in Bitcoin, are actually in cryptocurrencies in general. If you compare it to any of the major players on the market, it's minuscule. So the fact that people say, well, Bitcoin's a bubble, it's going to pop, it's so small compared to what it can be. The potential is huge, and we've seen that in the year 2017, going from entire market cap for all cryptocurrencies at around 17 billion in January to now bordering on somewhere close to $700 billion. That's nothing to laugh at. That's going to just continue to grow, and Bitcoin is continuing to grow. There are some problems with transaction fees. Hopefully the Lightning Network can solve that issue. The free market is always right. If people switch over from Bitcoin to another cryptocurrency, then that's the way it is. The market will decide that. But it all comes down to the quality of the product. And I think Bitcoin is a very high quality product that we're going to continue to see rise over the next several years.
Yeah, right. I think that this whole cryptocurrency phase is going to be good for the younger generation, especially the millennials and those the younger that are actually aware of this technology and can use it, and especially people who've gotten in early. But yet the older generation who are dependent upon pensions and conventional retirement vehicles, they're the ones that's going to miss out. So, John, before you get into that, I want to hint on how this cryptography is actually becoming a form of investment / an early retirement savings vehicle type of thing for the younger generation, but yet the older generation who are dependent upon promises from their employers or the government on the short end of the stick are going to miss out. So share your thought, and then let's get into pensions as we draw towards the end of our conversation tonight.
Yeah, no, it's with the blockchain, I think we're bringing back honesty into the system. That's what I'm seeing. And I think people are going to have to be honest again. There's not going to, if you implement these blockchain systems, even trading of today, you're gonna expose the massive schemes that the banks have done in the first place. So I don't know what they're really thinking about implementing all this blockchain technology. They're trying to mold it in a weird kind of way that it's not really supposed to be. So I don't know what the outcome is going to be out of it. But if they have to implement it, for example, to gold and silver will skyrocket. Our friend Stephen Kendall if you look him up on Twitter, he said that if that happens, gold is going to raise to a minimum of $56,000 in value, because all that paper is going to eviscerate from the air, all that fake paper that was created. So I'm very excited about that. I think with all this implementation, and also to government, we could replace most of our government. If we want a government, we could replace most of our government with blockchain technology and have an extremely limited amount of government where you don't basically need no taxes. So I think that's where I see this whole blockchain together with cryptocurrencies are moving towards, on the one side, and then the other side is trying to centralize this technology and control it, as they usually always are.
And I just want to counter one point that I saw in the comments just now, that one guy said all crypto is valued in dollars, and that's a problem. That's not actually accurate. All crypto is valued versus the price of living. It's just a lot more simple to explain to the average Joe and Jane the value in fiat dollars. But you don't need the yuan to value the US dollar. You don't need the US dollar to value the yuan. You need that versus a price of living. So when all the fiat currencies fall, we'll be judging Bitcoin by its own denominations based on the price of living. And I think that's an important point to make, as a lot of people confuse this.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. I'm just looking at the trading platform that me and Josh uses, for example, Bittrex. You actually trade towards Bitcoin instead of the US dollar. Like, you don't even see the US dollar price really. You see how many Bitcoins is it versus like this. There's a lot of things that are happening that are really changing around the world. People are seeing this whole cryptocurrency, and at a point, who knows, maybe we'll just replace it, hopefully, with a decentralized system where you go and buy something in the store and it's denominated in whatever cryptocurrency that store wants to have.
All right, let's we got a caller. Caller, what's your name and where you calling from?
Hey, my name is Mike. I'm calling from Phoenix.
Mike from Phoenix. How you doing, buddy? What's your question?
Hey, I'm a huge fan, guys. I have a question about cryptocurrencies and the end game of the dollar. I see a lot of people aren't talking about the unintended consequences of cryptocurrency. I see it sucking out a lot of liquidity out of the system. So by my estimates, again, I'm no economist or anything, but $7 trillion means that, well, it's 500 billion right now, right? So if it gets to 700 trillion or 7 trillion, the banks don't have capital to loan against. And I'm curious if you've done any thinking about that. The other thought I was thinking about as far as the dollar goes is if 1% of the crypto money went into silver, like physical silver, it'd dry up the silver. And that would, the physical supply, and whether that would, drive the prices up and cause currency failure. So just curious about those dollar endgame scenarios from you guys. So thanks.
Thanks for the question.
I would just make one point, and it sounds kind of destructive, but I welcome the crash of the fiat system. I welcome the dollar crash because it's got to happen eventually, and the longer we wait, the worse it's going to be. So I don't really have a problem with liquidity being taken out of the system. I don't really have a problem with any damaging blows to the fiat monetary system, because in the long run, we need it to happen in order to build up from a free monetary level. So I know it sounds destructive, but again, the further we push this off, the more in trouble we will be. The longer we wait for the fiat crash to happen, the bigger the crash is going to be, and the more destructive it's going to be for individuals who, especially those who haven't been educated and haven't prepared themselves. On the topic of, physical silver, etc., I think that it's important that the market decides what is going to happen with gold, silver, Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies. So from the point of view of, people putting money from Bitcoin into silver, etc., so be it. The market will, the market should go the way the individual decides with their public or individual demand. So if people want to buy a whole bunch of silver, if people want to buy a whole bunch of gold, if people want to buy a whole bunch of Bitcoin, trade back and forth, that's up to them. There's a problem with whales in every kind of market, people pulling in, pulling out, etc. But of course, in the free market system that we're heading into in the future, I think it'll come down to most people taking part in this, most people being educated because they'll be forced to be educated, and the market is always right, like I said. So I don't really have an issue with that per se. So like I said, the fiat system has to crash. Silver and gold will rise up. They've been incredibly undervalued, going back to like the 1930s under the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which was propped up with money taken from the public via the confiscation of gold by FDR, and going into all these other funds, the GLD in Chicago, all this manipulation. I think the second you set it all free, the second that system comes down, we are going to be in a much better place, and we won't have a whole lot to complain about other than maybe the whales that might get into the market, trade in or out at large, in large numbers.
John, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think we need to move towards this free market, and whatever people choose to do or what will happen with people's choice, the individual vote or what they want as a currency, I think that's the future, no matter what that is. If that's Bitcoin, if that's any kind of cryptocurrency, or if that's a mixture of gold and silver, or whatever that could be, as long as it's a stable currency that everybody chooses to use and are aware of, the history in the past, I don't see problem whatsoever with any liquidity getting sucked out of the system, because this whole system of dollars have about 1.2 quadrillion dollars in derivatives that are, in a massive proportion, just fake money that are slushing around in the world that nobody's accounted for. What if that suddenly had to become real money and be within U.S. borders? What are you going to do about inflation, for example, when all this money is going to slowly start to come back to the United States? Think about the recent tax bill that, which is great, that is cutting taxes on corporations, of course. But think about that tax bill, all that money starting to flow back to the United States now. I see a lot of, mass amount of liquidity coming back to the United States that have been hidden offshore. And you're going to see huge, not liquidity crisis. You're going to see so much money coming back that you're going to actually have a very high inflation in the United States, and possibly, it could trigger other events that could end up, towards an inflationary state at one point, with hyperinflation, and of course with all this money coming back. You got to remember the current prices in the inside of the United States is based on inside border United States dollars. When you drag in, let's say people are thinking that 4.5 trillion more dollars is going to come within borders as the corporations are going to cash in on this tax cut. Well, that's 4.5 trillion in new dollars. Where is that money going to move to if it gets, shoved out to the public? Well, of course, it's great that it's getting out to the public, but the problem is also what they're not thinking of is as people get the higher wages and everything, the prices and inflation will go up at the same time. So with this whole talk of liquidity crisis that, cryptocurrencies may cause, I think it's great that we're seeing people moving away from and distrusting this current system that are so flawed, that have been manipulated throughout, 100 years, over 100 years now, with the Federal Reserve System and the fractional reserve banking. I think we're seeing people waking up and finally, starting to take action and voting themselves out of the system and away from it. And I think we should welcome it with open arms.
Good one. I do agree there. Now let's end this note on retirement and pension. I know, Josh, you covered very well. You and John both over at WHAM on the whole idea of just what's happening with pensions and retirement and how that whole paradigm is crumbling right before our very eyes. Share with me your thoughts on the days ahead as pensions really begin to unravel, and how people will basically be impacted by it, how society, how the world may be impacted by the day pensions and retirements or the promises are really broken.
Yeah, it comes back down to, like I mentioned before, the dependency. And like I mentioned, most young people will not see pensions unless they are making their own pensions. They're saving themselves with, cryptocurrencies, gold, silver, in my opinion. And one thing that we've noticed is this vast dependency, like we mentioned earlier on in the show, with people staying at home with their parents, depending on their parents. These parents, the baby boomer generation, are slowly dying off, as well as in a lot of debt themselves. And then the students are in debt. And you combine this together and you got a recipe for disaster, all while people are buying into these banker Ponzi schemes where, let's have a gun to our head and told that we have to save this way, even though there's all this risk. And then we end up with this pension system. So it comes down to individuals saving themselves by, looking for ways to invest their money, insure their wealth, and save for the future. But of course, today, we're taught to just depend on the banks to save for our future themselves, or depend on the government to save for our futures themselves. And John actually wrote a lot into it in his book, Canada, the Greatest Economy in the World, as well as, I believe, The End of Freedom, How Our Monetary System Enslaves Us. Both are up on Amazon, where it really goes into this problem. And I think that he has a lot to say on this topic as well.
Yeah, no, as I see it, here is that we have an issue where we created a system that people are being herded in towards, in this United States, the 401ks, or here in Canada, what we call the RSPs, the retirement savings plans. It's all the same scheme where I talked to one of my financial advisors that I actually use. I not necessarily listen to everything that he says, but he's a smart guy. He understands what we are understanding as well. But what he said something ingenious. He's a teacher, actually a smart teacher that, teaching people something else out of the, the current schooling system is giving them financial education, which is so important today. Understanding money economics and how the world works around you. He said that these 401ks, RSPs were created between the banks, because the banks make mass amounts of what's called MER fees on the management expense ratios. And then on the backside, the government gives you a little bit of tax write-off incentive on the front end, but then they tax you 30, 40, 50% on the back end when you actually start withdrawing money from your retirement plans. And that is, a lot of people are not aware of that. Like my advisor said, he's sitting down constantly with more and more people that doesn't have a clue that they were going to get taxed so much when they took their money out of this retirement plan that they had. And that's a huge problem that we're seeing. That's, the one side where they had personal kind of responsibility where they put into the system that they were taught to put it into, because they were dependent, because they didn't have financial education. That's one side. But then, of course, you have the government side of the pie, where you have in Canada the CPP, or Social Security in the United States, and other programs that you have around the world, where people are dependent on the government and retiring on it. I see people and friends and family back home in Norway that are retiring baby boomers that are going to suffer because they were just dependent on that government pension that they thought that they were getting. But the problem is all these pension funds, they promised X amount of return over time. Well, they don't have been able to make that return because of the low interest rates around the world, and they had to take mass amounts of risk. For example, me and Josh did a video on the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is also a huge part of the Norwegian pension fund for the government that they, supposed to give back to the populace. They have gone from, holding 45, 50% of equities, stocks, to now almost 70%, because people are chasing this yield, because debt is so low that they used to invest in. That was very safe. Debt used to be very safe. And now they're flying into equities, which is known to be risky. And you've been told from financial advisors that you should, move more into bonds when you get older, because it's more safer. The problem is all this debt that is accumulated is now at the risk of defaulting everywhere, even government debt. And so there's no safe, investments anywhere anymore that people are aware of, that they got educated on. But there is, of course, if you had financial education, one of my mentors was Robert Kiyosaki. He's, one of the big guys about talking about financial education. He said, you have to educate yourself on money and economics. And if you don't, you are going to live in that rat race, continuing to struggle and being eaten alive by the system, because the system is built and staged against you on the grand scheme of things. So they always want you to be dependent on it. But if you break free, if you become independent, if you start educating yourself and understanding, fields of cryptocurrency, gold, silver, understanding the importance of being self-sufficient, having your own food at your home, and being able to investing in land, investing in real estate, but you just got to understand how to do it properly. You can get away from this dependency on the massive pension scheme, which I see, Mike, I see it collapsing completely. You have the CalPERS, the biggest pension fund in the United States, on the verge of bankruptcy, and many other municipal and intergovernmental pension funds around the world are looking at default, and you will probably see some freeze around the world when we really get into issues where everybody's exiting for the doors and finding out that, oh, this was a big scam, so they're just trying to get out what they can. We can have a collapse. We can have an asset freeze around the world of all these assets that you thought that you had and that you were promised by the government, or that you have used all your life savings into. You just need to look at, for example, places like Argentina. I have a friend of mine here in Winnipeg that survived and moved from Argentina in 2001. Let me tell you a quick story from Argentina that will kind of tell you what we are to see in North America here in a very near future. In 2001, the Argentinian peso went through what's called a devaluation, where they take suddenly the X amount of pesos that you currently had is now worth this much. So they suddenly devalued 75% of the pesos. Now, he had learned from his dad, because his dad went through a similar period in the 80s in Argentina, where he lost 75% of what he was supposed to retire on because they devalued the currency. He thought it was smart. He moved out of pesos into US dollars, but he was in Citibank, which was Argentinian owned and controlled. So Citibank just took his US dollars, transferred them into Argentinian pesos, then they devalued overnight. And that's what had happened in Argentina, in Venezuela currently as well. People that have saved up, let's say 1 million bolivars, and you were quite rich before this whole massive money printing from the government. You had a whole bunch of money saved up in a system that you thought was there for you to take care of you. Well, now suddenly overnight, it's worth nothing, and you're sitting there because you weren't financially educated. You were stuck in a system holding this fiat paper money in assets, because that's what it's usually denominated in and what you hold it in. You were stuck, and you lost everything you had.
Yeah. Yeah, and it happens over and over again. You would think that people would wake up to what's happening and what has happened throughout the last 100 years of this current monetary system being comprised of debt. But people don't seem to be waking up fast enough, but we are doing our best to wake up as many as we can. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us. It's been about an hour plus, so we definitely cover a lot of topics. I thank you for chiming in, and thank you all those that called in tonight to ask these questions. And definitely we need to make this information more available to more people so they can begin waking up and rethinking the dollar, as well as their financial information, as well as just becoming more aware of the other side of the coin that is not taught in school. So, gentlemen, any last thoughts before we log off for this evening?
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you having us. You do great work at Rethinking the Dollar. Just closing it off, freedom is the answer, and you cannot have freedom without self-responsibility. Responsibility and freedom go hand in hand, and it all comes down to you as an individual, the choices you make. And I think we can map out an incredible new free world without the coercion of collective state cartels and coercion. I think we can find ourselves a brand new, amazing free world based on the free market and free monetary systems without legal tender laws. Like I said, freedom's always the answer.
Freedom.
Yeah, I know economic education, money, and how the monetary system works is so important, and you just got to start preparing yourself and getting into the mindset of understanding how things are going to come down, or study it and then position yourself in a good spot, so you don't have to sit there and be nervous about when this thing is going to happen. A lot of people think that they can make a move just right then and there when it happens, but it's going to be too late when it happens. So just start to preparing. There's no me and Josh I've been talking about this for 8 years, and people have been saying to me, oh, you've been talking for this for so long, it's not happening. It will happen. We know it's going to happen. We read the history books. We know that it's 100% clear that will happen. You just can't pinpoint it to a date. Unfortunately, there's too many people out there saying, "Oh, it's going to happen now, tomorrow, whatever date." It will happen. Just prepare yourself, and you'll feel a lot more comfortable with your life. You'll feel a lot more safer. You won't run around nervous about what's going to happen the next day. I think that's the number one lesson that we have to take out of all this is we got to just get prepared and understand things, and you feel a lot more safer and educate friends, family, and everybody around the world. Share my books, for example, or share your YouTube channel, Mike, and me and Josh's YouTube channel. It's so important to share that information with everybody around you so people can get prepared and feel a lot better about their lives, so they're not so scared as we saw in Venezuela when it collapsed. It was full panic there because not too many people were educated and understood what was going on. If we can educate the more amount of people we can educate, the better off we'll be when things are, eventually happen.
Yeah, as John said, it comes down to the fundamentals are off the table due to the level of manipulation in the monetary system. So you can't put a date on it. You just know it's going to happen. We've been saying it for a long time because it's been happening for a long time. Anyway, freedom.
Good job. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining me. It was definitely great to have you guys on. Look forward to doing this again in 2018. And hopefully we'll see some of the developments in the crypto space as well as the monetary system, as well as all the Fed things happening. So there's so much to cover, but not much time to do it. So, gentlemen, thank you for once again joining me. Look forward to staying in touch with what you guys got going on and keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a good job over there.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Pleasure.